ideal as a consequence of that inadequacy, and then you have to rectify it. So you see, you can extract out information that would be salutary for the development of your personality from doing pattern analysis of repeated failures.
Right, sure.
Or you can just not do that.
I mean, that relates very much to, when you talk about internal versus external locus of control. Let's suppose I have failed 3 times in businesses. So to link back to your story about, the rejections at the bar. But in this case, I'm an entrepreneur who has failed on 3 separate occasions in 3 separate business endeavors. If I am someone who is going to attribute each of those failures externally, it's God. It's because consumers are dumb. It's because they weren't sufficiently ready. The market wasn't ready for me. So I always attribute those failures externally. I am removing the possibility of having a feedback loop of learning where I attribute some of those failures to decisions that I made, so that when I go to my 4th business endeavor, I actually don't implement some of the reasons why I failed. So in a sense, your attribution style, internal versus external, could be contributing to you either going into the fog or getting out of the fog, correct?
Well, yeah, I think that's a useful way of looking at it. We could talk about internal versus external there too. So if you have an external locus of control, you view yourself as that which is being acted upon.
Right.
Now, that can be useful in many, many circumstances. So because you might say, for example, about this entrepreneur, that he should take failure base rates into account. 3 failures is nothing. Maybe you need 12 failures before you've gathered enough information to be a successful entrepreneur, right? So that's where external locus of control is actually useful. So you can't necessarily tell to begin with which one is going to work. If you always use an external locus of control, the problem then is that you're never driven to change anything about your fossilized ideas, and the old dead king that is operating your thoughts never gets dethroned. So that's a problem. The problem is if you have an internal locus of control and it always operates, the probability that you're going to get depressed is quite high, because every failure is your fault.
That's right.
And, it might be indicative of a fundamental flaw. So it's really tricky to get this balance right.
As a matter of fact, and I mean, of course, you would know this since you just hinted at it. When I tell my students about this fundamental attribution error of attributing successes internally and attributing failures externally, the only group that doesn't suffer from that glowing, rosy fundamental attribution error are depressives, right? And I'm not sure if the research now has said it clearly, whether it's because I start off with a non-rosy view of the world that causes me to be more likely to be depressed, or is it when I am in a bout of depression, the glosy goes away? Have they resolved the chicken and egg?
So this is a good place to talk about something else that's somewhat archetypal. Every time you learn something, generally speaking, it comes as a surprise, right? And this is technically true, that which is not surprising contains no information. It's virtually a definition of information.
Right.
Okay. If it surprises you, it means it violates one of your presuppositions. Okay, so now that means that presupposition has to die. And I mean die because it's actually instantiated on a biological platform. Let's say it's a neural structure or a neural pattern. I don't care, it's still a structure, even if it's a pattern. It'd be the interconnections between neurons. That thing has to be punished out of existence. It has to be extinguished. Now, exactly how much of it has to be extinguished, that's a very, very difficult question. Like, if you get rebuffed when you try to pick someone up in a bar, it might be because you are the most undesirable creep in the world. That's actually true for one person somewhere, right? So, and it might be you. Hopefully you don't leap to that conclusion immediately and you start with a smaller presupposition.
Right.
There might be some externalization in that. In any case, a little part of you, every time you are surprised by something, a little part of you has to die. Some part of you has to die. Sometimes now, imagine that presuppositions are in a hierarchy. So some are essentially irrelevant to your continued actions and some are crucial. So a crucial one, imagine you're planning the future and you're married. Okay, the existence of your wife is a critical presupposition to your future plans, or many of them. And so if your relationship becomes endangered, or if her life is put in danger, then that's going to be very impactful, because her absence is going to destroy a huge chunk of your map of the world. All right. The price we pay for learning is to die a little bit. The trick is to not die too much.
Right.
And that's, so I think it was Alfred North Whitehead said that, we have to let our ideas die instead of us. That's the purpose of abstract thought. We can let our ideas die instead of us. But that needs to be rebuilt to some degree, because your ideas are you, and they're actually alive too. And so when one of your ideas dies, that's a part of you, and it might be a big part of you, and it actually sometimes might be such a big part of you that you actually can't survive the experience. And that's a traumatic experience. It's like it's blown out so much of your presupposition network that you might not be able to get yourself back up and going again. If you look at the genesis of depression, major depressive disorder, it's very, very frequently the case that the first episode is brought on by some major trauma, like some genuinely horrible event. And then the nervous system is somewhat compromised after that, and lesser events can produce an equal response. So it's no wonder we hide things in the fog.
Yeah.
But sometimes when you hide something in the fog, it just grows. And then when it does come out, it's trauma. Like, instead of having an argument about flirting, you end up in divorce court, debating who's going to have custody of your kids for the next 10 years.
Well, on a very pragmatic level, I could tell you that in my own marriage, the way that my wife and I deal with, we rarely, truly, frankly, have any conflict. But the equivalent of your story about the flirtatious, there's a haircut, a flirtatious neighbor, if that were to happen, I'm someone who doesn't let things fester in me. And so I will confront the negative emotions that I'm feeling at the moment, deal with them, and then we hug it out and we move on. I'm very, very intolerant internally to an environment of stress, of poutiness, of turning. Maybe it's part of my openness. Maybe it's my gregariousness. Maybe so. I can't function in that environment. So if I'm angry, you'll know it.
How sensitive are you to negative emotion? You're very enthusiastic. You're obviously very extroverted, but how sensitive are you to negative emotion?
So meaning that if I experience a negative emotion, how catastrophic will it be for me?